You know, when it comes to cloud computing, you'd think that using more reliable services would automatically make your product more reliable, right? It just seems like common sense. But what if I told you the answer is often no? Let's dive into what's called the multi-cloud reliability paradox.
Okay, let's start with a little thought experiment. Imagine you're building a service and you've picked 3 top-notch cloud providers to handle different parts of it. Each one promises at least 99.9% uptime. You're feeling pretty good about that. So the big question is, what uptime can you actually promise your users? Well, the answer is probably not what you think.
Before we get into any of the tech, let's start where all great system design has to start, with the user. The very first thing we need to wrap our heads around is the promise we're making to them.
In the tech world, we have a name for that promise. It's called a service level objective, or an SLO. And look, it's way more than just a number on a dashboard. It's a public commitment. It's you telling your users exactly what kind of reliability they can and should expect from your service.
So for our example, let's say we've set a pretty common SLO, 99.9% uptime for one of our key features. It sounds great, it seems totally reasonable, but what does that percentage actually mean in the real world?
Well, when you run the numbers, 99.9% uptime means our service can only be down for about 8 hours and 45 minutes for the entire year. That is not a lot of wiggle room. Every single second of downtime eats into what we call our error budget, and that promise is something we have to keep.
So how do we deliver on that pretty strict promise? Well, our feature, it isn't as simple as it looks on the outside. Under the hood, there's this chain of hidden dependencies, and they all have to work together perfectly to make the magic happen.
Let's just walk through a single user action. First, your app needs to authenticate the user with provider A. Then it's got to process their data using provider B. And finally, it stores the result with provider C. Now, the key thing to get here is that if any one of these steps fails, the entire request fails. For the user, it just doesn't work. They are all mandatory dependencies.
And this brings us to the absolute core concept of this whole explainer. Reliability isn't something you add up, it's multiplicative. You don't get to average the uptime of your providers. No, you have to multiply them together. Your service is a chain, and it's only as strong as all of its links combined. Okay, now that we understand this whole chain of dependencies idea, let's take a look at the promises that each of those dependencies is making back to us.
This is where the service level agreement, or SLA, comes into play. So if an SLO is our promise to our users, an SLA is our provider's promise to us. It's a contract, a formal agreement that guarantees a certain level of uptime, and usually there are financial penalties if they don't meet it.
So just to nail this down, an SLO is your outbound promise to your users. An SLA is an inbound promise you get from your providers. And to set a realistic SLO, you absolutely have to understand the SLAs of all your critical dependencies. It's non-negotiable.
All right, we've got our 99.9% SLO. That's our promise. And we have the SLAs from our 3 providers. Those are their promises. Now it is time for the moment of truth. Let's do the math and see if we can actually deliver on our promise.
Okay, here are the SLAs for our providers. Provider A is giving us 99.95%, Provider B is at 99.9%, and Provider C is killing it with 99.99%. At first glance, you're probably thinking, this is great. All of these are at or even better than our 99.9% goal. We're golden.
But remember the rule of the chain. We don't average these numbers. We don't get to just pick the lowest one. We have to multiply them, all of them together. So what happens when we actually do that?
And there's our answer, 99.84%. Now, notice something really important here. This number is lower than the SLA of any single one of our providers. By combining these super reliable services, we've actually created something less reliable than any of its individual parts. This is the multi-cloud reliability paradox right there in front of you.
Let's just put these two side by side. We promised our users 99.9% uptime, but our architecture's theoretical maximum uptime is only 99.84%. We have literally designed a system that cannot meet its goal even if every single one of our providers performs perfectly.
That little 0.06% gap might not seem like a big deal, but when you translate it into time, it's huge. It works out to over 5 extra hours of downtime per year. We promised our users less than 9 hours of downtime, but our system is fundamentally built to have up to 14. That's a massive difference in user experience.
So we have this gap, a gap between our promise and our mathematical reality.
What do we do now? Well, as an architect, your job isn't to cross your fingers and hope for the best, it's to design for reality.
This is your mandate. You have to account for this multiplied risk. That means designing for resilience, building in things like graceful fallbacks and automated retries. It means setting SLOs that are based on math, not on some marketing goal. You have to clearly communicate these risks to everyone involved. And ultimately, you have to get this. High availability isn't something you just get for free from your providers. It is a feature you must actively build and design for.
So let's end with this thought. If your service goes down, but all of your providers met their SLAs for the month, they've done their job. They kept their promise to you. But you failed to keep your promise to your user. So who's responsible? The answer is you, the architect. The responsibility for that end-to-end user experience, it always rests with you.